Welcome back to the Sports Business Take podcast. I am Paul Hine. He is Zach Creekmore, and today we have a very special guest, Cathal Conlon of the New England Revolution, the Vice President of the New England Revolution. I had the privilege of meeting Cathal at the Craft Sports Career Fair when I went down to Gillette with McCormick student leaders here at UMass, and he's been very kind for coming on the show today. So, Cathal, could you explain very quickly maybe your role at the Revs and kind of what your responsibilities are as Vice President?
Absolutely. I'm not sure if I can do it very quickly, but I'll do it as quickly as I can.
Sorry, I didn't mean to limit you. Do
Yeah, no
do your
worries, no
thing.
worries, no worries. Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here. So it's sort of my role at the Revs and the VP of Marketing and Community Engagement. So basically, oversee all our touch points with our fans, whether it's in the virtual digital spaces or whether it's in at events and sort of old school advertising or in person events. Any touch point we have with our fans, trying to understand who our fans are, how to reach them, getting into the whole data analysis piece, which we've obviously is front and center for everybody now, which we added a couple of years ago too. So that's the Cliff Notes version, I guess, of what I try to oversee on a day-to-day basis.
Sorry about the very quickly thing. I didn't mean to limit you, but thank you
No
for
worries.
thank you for describing that. So I heard you mention your relationship with the fans, and that was one of the first things I actually wanted to ask you. Was you've been at the Revs for almost 20 years now? How have you seen both the organization and its relationship with the fans change in your time there?
Yeah, so I mean, soccer's such a unique animal, and one of the things that makes it unique is the supporter culture around the sport, right? There's just a different way to consume the sport than you have with the other major sports. And if you think about just our stadium, you play at Gillette Stadium, right? You can have the same seat in for both teams, but in section 143 behind the goal, but you're encouraged to cheer for the Revs in a very different way than you would even be allowed to at a Patriots game, right? With drums and streamers and banners, and it's just a different animal. What comes along with that is, I think, a deeper sense of ownership or connection to the team that our supporters in particular have. So when I first got here, it was really empowerment to build that connection to our official supporters groups. We have two supporters groups behind the goal, the Midnight Riders and the Rebellion. And it was important to sort of build personal connections with those groups. They're very important to how we drive the atmosphere in the building. And it was important to work with them to try and create a good culture around the team. So at a sort of base level, that was the most important piece with making that personal connection. But now as sports and the business of sports has evolved, right, it's all about how customized can we get now. When I first started, marketing was stick a billboard up and stick the ad in the paper and stick an ad in the TV and stick an ad in the radio and hope for the best, right? That does not fly anymore. It does not fly for my boss who assigns the budgets, and it does not fly for most business leaders. You gotta be able to track results now, but also we need to figure out in its most basic form, right? Who are our fans? What do they want from us? How do we reach them on their terms? And then how do we find more fans? Right?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Right. So in that customization, you're basically enhancing the fan experience for each individual fan. And Zach, I think I don't want to cut you off here, but I think you have a question that ties into that pretty well.
Absolutely, but I first of all want to recognize that key relationship between the club and the ultras, and it's a beautiful thing that you committing time and developing that, especially in the U.S. market where I think we don't see it as often, especially in the U.S. sports scene. So beautiful to see that adaptation, especially with the Revs. I think they have a great environment and do really well in that same way of developing that marketing intelligence and how it's developed. Super interesting. During your time as vice president of the Revolution and the MLS has grown massively. With the World Cup in 2026, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Revolution and soccer's continued growth as the sport has more eyes on it than ever. What has you excited for the continued growth of sport in the U.S.?
Yeah, look, I mean, this league was born off the '94 World Cup, right? That's the size of the impact that this tournament can have. This league was born out of what happened here in '94. So the opportunity that the World Cup presents is massive, right? And I think about what's happened since '96 and the steps that have been put in place by MLS to grow, right? It's been very, very controlled growth, very measured, but sustained, right? To get to a point where we had a solid product on and off the field that was ready to sort of take that next step. There's a couple of things I think about when you just look at the growth of the league, right? This league almost folded back in early 2000s, right? They contracted from 12 teams back to 10. It was looking bad. You had three guys owned all 10 teams, right? Phil Anschutz and AEG Group owned 5 teams. You had the Hunt family owned 3 teams, and the Crafts were owning and operating 2 teams, right? Those 3 guys kept the league running and sort of got together and said, we're going to consolidate this thing. We believe in it, and we're going to hold tight and then try and get ready for the next phase. And then 2005, Seattle Sounders come along and sort of change everyone's perspective of what's possible. And from there, it's been this sort of growth, right? And the biggest, I think, difference, or the biggest example of how the league has developed, 2007, Beckham comes, right? And we were not ready for David Beckham. The league was not ready for him on every level, right? His professionalism, just the size of his global reach. We were not ready to deal with him at an infrastructure level, at a fan base level, at an ownership level. We just weren't ready. He helped us grow and think about how we should be operating as a league. And you fast forward now to Messi joining the league. Messi's just gas on the fire now, right? Like Beckham was a lone guy trying to drag the league forward. Messi is dropped into an already successful league on and off the field. Mm-hmm. It's gas on the fire. This thing starts to go. And you look across the league, we're 29 teams about to be 30. And it's all these new stadiums, all these great players. The World Cup is the next sort of inflection point. But instead of going steady growth to here, now we're here and we're ready to launch. I mean, that's really what I think about what the World Cup can do. And if you look at sports properties in the US, I mean, not many of them are growing, right? MLS and NBA have sustained growth, right? The NFL is still an animal, a monster, of course, right? But it's hard to grow when you're already that big. But the 2 properties that are showing sort of sustained growth are MLS and the NBA. And to be only 30 years into this thing and see what's happening across the country, and we're going to average 28,000 for the season here. That does not fit inside the TD Garden, right? Like that's
right.
That's, and when I joined this league, it was 2006, and we were 10 years in. I mean, we were getting 10,000 people to games. So it's easy to see across the country what's happening, but we're spending a lot of our time as clubs and staff focused on how do we make sure we're ideally positioned. So when 26 comes and literally the eyes of the world turn to soccer in the United States, are we ready to capitalize? And I think all the signs are there that we are.
Well said. And I absolutely agree. I think the best way to put it is natural growth, of naturally growing and capitalizing on moments in history and moments in fandom, moments in sport that elevate and position you to succeed.
Yeah, and look, MLS has been painfully controlled. I think a lot of the owners now are champing at the bit to have more money and go get more players and higher salary cap, and they want to go. And the league have been very good at saying we need to be careful, because the North American Soccer League did this and brought in all the aging stars and loaded it up, and the thing collapsed because you ended up with a super team in the West and a super team in the East, and nobody else cared about anything else. And I think MLS has been really good about, we have to sustain this thing and we have to grow it across the whole country. And all these mechanisms are in place about which player can go where and what's your salary, how many DPs do you have, and it's all controlled to get to a point to where we are now, which is sustained, successful, nationwide, ready to grow. Now it's time to go.
Absolutely. It's an exciting moment.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you mentioned that inflection point of the World Cup, and it sure makes it easier on you to market those stars when they're coming over from Europe and all that. So speaking on the marketing, what was your favorite theme night or promotion maybe in your time that you've been at the Revs?
Oh, wow. It depends, right? It depends on sort of the lens we're looking through, right? We did I'm a huge Star Wars fan, right? So a couple of years ago, we did a full Star Wars night. We partnered with them and did it officially. We had a little...
Oh, wow.
We had an R2-D2 holding up the ball for the referee to take before the game. Like, it was awesome. Yeah. I was riding in an elevator with Vader and a bunch of stormtroopers, right? So from a personal level, that was really cool. But I think what we've tried to do, what we're very conscious of, is our whole experience, however you interact with us, we have to reflect our entire region, our entire fan base wherever we can, right? And when we think about sort of heritage nights, right, and we want to do those correctly and we want to do those authentically, and we partner with community groups from those prospective communities to build out the programming around the match day. So you end up with hopefully what's a fairly authentic reflection of the theme, right? And whether that's, a heritage night or whether it's an awareness night for a campaign. We partnered with Taylor Twellman, who's obviously a legend in the sport and had to retire from his career with us with concussions, traumatic brain injury, set up his own foundation. And I think we were the first and still might be the only professional sports team that has an annual concussion awareness night, right?
Wow.
And that's really important to us. And it's probably one of those things you could look at and go, we share a building with an NFL team, and the NFL's approach to concussions is much different than the MLS approach, right? But I think MLS as a young property is willing to sort of take on some causes that maybe others can't. And I think that concussion awareness night is a real indication of that. And like Twellman leads the whole audience in reciting his pledge, right, about concussion awareness. And so I think we try to be true and we try to be authentic wherever we can with our match day.
Yeah, and that being authentic is so important because your fans can tell when you're not. I'm
an Irishman living in Boston. I've been around a lot of inauthentic Irish nights. I sympathize.
Yeah.
So it's important to me that we do it right.
Right, yeah, and connecting with that community is so important. I remember I worked for the Portland Sea Dogs 2 summers ago, and our community nights were so centered around making people feel like they were part of the organization, and that really sounds that concussion night in particular really sounds like making those people who are involved in that promotion really involved in that part of the organization. So thank you for speaking.
Yeah, and look, you can do it in. I mean, that whole idea of being part of something bigger and everyone's part of the club, right? And that's a cliche that everybody uses, right? But you can actually put it into practice, right? And for example, like with player appearances and stuff, we try to not put our player behind a table or behind a rope. Like even that sort of barrier, whether it's perceived or real, we try to remove. So players can be actually talking to people, and there's no sort of, we're all part of the one thing. Yeah, everyone's job is different, and the players certainly are the most important part of it and have the most important job for sure. But I think, we also try to impress on the players that without the fans, there is no product. Without the fans, there is no league. And we need to make sure that when we're around them that we connect. And that's, little things. But our captain this year went to Children's Hospital and visited a cancer patient, and they had it's a structured player appearance, but they had a very organic sort of connection when they were talking, and they got to talking about goal celebrations. And Carla said, "If I score a goal, what would you like me to do?" Right. So the kid was like, "Oh, give me the heart hands," or something like that. So Carla scores, and our photographers are sort of mirroring him around the field, right, to make sure they're there, and he scores. So they start waving at him. So he runs over to the camera and he does the celebration, right? And we get this sort of payoff, and this kid gets this incredible moment that we just can't buy and we can't strategize for. We can't market that. We can't put that in a marketing plan. That's just stuff that happens. But being able to facilitate those connections, and when they happen, being able to amplify them that's some of the gold that sports provides for us that just other businesses don't.
Definitely. That's one of the reasons to work in sports is really cool moments like that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's capitalizing on human connection. It's a beautiful thing, and it's why we love atmospheres and environments where people come together, and why we love event marketing.
Well, you get instant payoff, right? And I tell my team all the time, if you were selling vacuum cleaners, like 30,000 people aren't showing up to see the new vacuum cleaner, right?
Very well said. I love it.
But you get to walk out and get that instant feedback that
which is beautiful. The roar of the crowd.
Yeah, hopefully.
In 2021, the Revolution went through their first rebrand. Could you speak to your role in this experience? We saw other MLS clubs do similarly, but received negative feedback from fans and take a step back from the rebrand. How did you make sure you and your team got this rebranding right? How was it partnering with Johns, Knowles, Richie, and managing this launch?
So this is something we had, I think we'd felt for a while that we needed to do. And it was, I think we'd always envisioned, like we've been trying to build a soccer stadium for decades, right? So we'd always envisioned that we could align these two things. And as things started to progress around the club, right, we built a state-of-the-art training center for the players, right? As good as you'll find anywhere in the world, right? We had all these designated players, star players on our roster. At the time, we had hired Bruce Arena, the winningest coach in history of MLS, and everything was progressing. and our brand had sort of stagnated. And we felt it was time that we needed to shoot some energy into it. So it was a 4-year process, start to finish. The first sort of 18 months of that was a lot of internal work between us, and MLS assisted a little bit, talking to all our stakeholders. The most crucial piece of that was focus groups. So we conducted a series of focus groups, and each group was made up of different constituents, right? Because it was important to us that this rebrand wasn't just for diehard Revs fans. It had to resonate, so it had to break through. So each group had a combination of Revolution fans, general soccer fans, then sort of general sports fans who may not even be huge soccer fans but are from the region, and then sort of some diehard folks thrown in, right? So we asked, it wasn't, the meetings weren't, we're going to design a new brand for the Revs, what do you think? The questions were much more about what should professional soccer in New England represent, right? That's sort of the tone of the meetings. So we listened to a lot. We were behind the glass, that old double-sided mirror thing, right? We're behind listening. And a lot of it was very critical of us as a club and as a brand. And then our logo was presented in the room, and it was instantly people were like, "Oh my god, that thing's terrible!" Right? So there was affirmation that we had to do something, right? But what equally became clear was that immediately people said the name should not change. That our name is good, our name resonates, our name is tied to something that's really important here, and we should not change the name. We should not be the Dynamo or Real or anything like that, some like made up associated name. And that was really important to us, because I think if you had asked me at the start of this thing, I would have said, yes, we need to have a football club or a soccer club name. We need to be the New England insert name soccer club, right? Because that's what's global appeal, and that's what we should be. And if when you actually stop and ask people, it immediately is evident that no, the name works. You should not change the name. So that was a huge piece of information to get right from the outset. So we then go to engage with the agency, and we interviewed a bunch of agencies, and JKR sort of put forward the best pitch on a bunch of different levels, but they got stuck in on trying to bring this to life. And again, it wasn't just about a logo, it was about an overhaul of our entire identity. Yes, you want to end up with a branding system, and we did, but it's also a tone of voice and a way you conduct yourself and rules for your day-to-day business practices, right? It was a whole sort of overhaul. Now, when we're in the middle of this process, Chicago happens, right? And the first rebrand absolutely bombs and flames. And it's, we get a little, obviously, that's scary. We doing this right. The next thing that happens is Columbus, right? And Columbus, which to this day I still don't understand. You have a grassroots nationwide platform around Save the Crew. You save the club, and then you rebrand and drop the word crew from the name. It made no sense to me. So I didn't quite understand that. So we had these two sort of live examples, and I think we were confident because we'd taken the step on the front end with the fan feedback, but you never know until people see the visual. So 6 months out from launch, our next phase is going to be, all right, we're going to sit with our supporters. We're going to show it to them. We're going to explain it to them. So when we do launch to everybody that, they're not that we want them to be advocates or ambassadors for it, but just so they know. Well, unfortunately, it leaks. The whole project leaks. And we have a freelance designer who was working for the agency who had the whole project on her blog. And someone found it, and silliness, complete silliness. But they found a sort of almost correct project, but it wasn't fully finished. So now we're like, okay, do we acknowledge it? Do we ignore it? Do we pretend it didn't happen? Do we say nothing? So we said nothing, and we listened. And thankfully, brand sentiment was really high. And we did a lot, the league did a lot of testing and comparisons between brand sentiment from our launch with everybody else's. And it was very favorable. So we felt good that we were in the right direction. We then had to sort of scramble a little bit with our supporters, and we did sit with them and take them through it and explain it to them. And they didn't all love it, but they all at least were able to recognize that we'd taken the time and the resources to try and do it right. So yeah, it was a fascinating 4-year-long project, odyssey, to get to where we are. But, I think compared to a few of our counterparts, we're really happy where we ended up.
Super
Absolutely.
interesting to hear about that process. The focus groups in particular, that's not something that a lot of people know about. That when a team is going through a rebrand or going through a marketing strategy, that they're trying to see if the fans like it or not. I don't think a lot of people think about, oh, teams are actually going out and asking fans what they think of it. So in talking about the strategies and going forward, what's one marketing strategy the New England Revolution plan on using in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, again, how long is this show? I think it's. I think when you boil down, I try to remind my team everything. When you boil this down, we're storytelling, right? That's what we're doing.
Yep.
Now, what changes is the vehicle. Um, what changes is where people are consuming, but the actual basics of telling a story don't change, right? So we're always thinking about, like, the question for us now is, what's our message coming off a really, really bad season, right? This team did not perform on the field, and frankly, didn't just limp their way to the end of the season, but absolutely collapsed, right? And how do we? What's our storyline coming out of that? Going into last year, and you don't build your whole brand campaign around the team, but it's certainly, you have to take some cues, right? So going into last year, it's about hiring a Caleb Porter, who's a two-time MLS Cup winning coach, right? And the talent you still have on the roster and all these exciting things. And now you're like, okay, I don't think fans are going to be too jazzed if we hit them over the head with Caleb Porter again right now, right? And that's not that we've lost faith in him, but that's just what do people want to hear from us. So, we're in that process right now. There's obviously positives you can look at, right? And someone like a Peyton Miller, who's a 16-year-old kid playing left back for us, and Esmir Bayraktarovic, who's 18, come up from our academy. Points of excitement, and obviously still some good players on the roster, but we need to tell our story, right? And we need to try and figure out, once we get that down, then where are people consuming? The same thing every year. Where are they consuming, and how do we get in front of them? We still believe in traditional mix. A lot of my counterparts around the league don't. We still believe in this marketplace. We have to have billboards, and we have to have out of home, and we have to have brand awareness, right? We'll just still do that. So I started off by saying you have to have ROI and tracking on everything, and billboards are probably the worst example of that. But in this marketplace, it's really important to us that an audience that's used to seeing their sports teams in high profile, high visible areas see us in that same area. So from a mix standpoint, we'll still do a lot of traditional mixed in with everything else, but our brand storyline is, I'll call it, under construction.
And it's all a process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And absolutely speaks to the community connection that you guys have, and that culture connection of you guys the Revs in general are very bought into that. So very well done on your part in marketing campaigns and in that communication, and in the branding story as well. With Boston's new NWSL franchise coming soon, aka launching in 2026, do you see possible joint marketing efforts between the two clubs? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Well, I'll answer it this way, right? We did not have a great relationship with the Breakers for a bunch of reasons, right? And I think at that stage, the stage of where the sport was at the time, the global sport of soccer, and where it was in America at the time, I think we sort of viewed each other much more as competition and adversaries than anything else. And that's totally different now. Like we're already very close with the ownership group over there at Boss Nation, and I think we look at it now as, a high tide raises all ships, right? The more people we can have consuming the sport and enjoying the sport, the better for everybody. So I would expect to see some collaboration with that group as we move forward. What it looks like, I couldn't tell you now. They're still in the process of building out their staff, and they're still sort of, their heads are spinning a little bit. It's moving really fast for them. But once they sort of build out their staff, and we've already had some conversations with them at sort of high levels about philosophies and strategies and the sport. But I think at a base level, we see them much more as partners in the growth of soccer than we did, with the Breakers. So, and that's not that it's not anything negative against the people that own the Breakers. That was our fault as much as anybody else. It's just a different mindset now. I think we have a much closer relationship with that group already, and I would expect to see some collaboration for sure in the future.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I love that you said it's about the growth of the sport. That's really, what the fans want, I think, is the growth of the sport that they love.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
we don't want to take up too much of your time. So I'm going to ask you the same closing question we asked all of our guests. If you could go back in time and be involved in one sports moment in history or game in history and be involved with the club, which would it be and why?
Now, is this in a fan perspective or in a working capacity?
Working capacity, but you can mix it into a fan perspective.
I would say go with both.
So from a fan perspective, unquestionably the Liverpool Champions League final in Istanbul when they were 3-0 down at halftime against AC Milan and were dead and buried and hadn't a chance and ended up coming back and winning the game on penalties is just it's one of those unbelievable moments in sports that just defied all logic and all belief. So as a fan, I would love to have been in that supporter end, particularly at halftime when we're dead and buried and the crowd all breaks into "You'll Never Walk Alone" and the team comes out and does what they did. So definitely that from a fan perspective. I think from a business perspective, I think if I could go back and change a result as well, I would go back to 2002 MLS Cup when we hosted it in Gillette Stadium in front of 62,000 people and lost. If I could go back and change that result, we would win that game and then we would be in a whole different scenario. But I don't know. I mean, I think you look at, it's probably the romantic in me, but you look at all those sort of moments of, the Red Sox comeback Netflix series is on right now. And like I can take that, I can watch that stuff all day, every day, and to be part of that 2004 organization, with the Red Sox, with how that was built and what they did and what they overcome to win that thing must have been incredible. But I don't know. I'd have to put a little more thought into it from a work standpoint, I think. Hopefully it'll be something to come here. Look, at 21 was tremendous for us in winning the Supporter Shield and breaking the record. And unfortunately, the points record is gone and we still haven't won MLS Cup. So hopefully that moment is still to come for me.
Yeah, good things in the future for the Revs for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was really
Pleasure.
great. We really appreciate your time. You guys do a great job. I know when our group came down to see the Revs game, we were very happy with our experience there. Like all my friends had a great time. So thank you so much for that. Continue providing fans with great experiences as you guys have. And for those who are listening, please go support the Revs. They do a great job. Thank you guys so much.